What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Iron Culture. It is me, Eric Trexler. I'm here with the Dr. Eric Helms. It's Monday night. It's 7 p.m. That means it's time to go live and talk everything fitness. Helms, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fantastic, and I'm excited that we're getting to see each other right before the holidays, or during the holidays, depending upon which of those holidays you partake in. Before we get back to our regularly scheduled, or irregularly scheduled, I should say, WNBF Pro interviews and some other pre-recorded content that will hold people over intermittently while we have festive things and my anniversary coming up in January. So it's good. It's good to touch base and see you, bud.
Yeah. I was getting a little nervous about my standing on the show with all the various guests who are not me. But no, it's been a great series of, talking to some of the best natural bodybuilders in the world, and we got more of that coming. So yeah, it's been nice to have a little holiday time for both of us. Especially I'm between holidays. Last night was the last night of Hanukkah. We got Christmas coming up in a few days. New Year's coming up. So whatever holidays you all happen to be celebrating, if any, we hope you enjoy them. If you're in the holiday spirit and you're feeling perhaps charitable, perhaps the nature and the spirit of gift giving is really, really filling you with energy right now. Might I consider a few areas where you can direct that energy? First of all, make sure you like, rate, subscribe, review, preferably a good review. Definitely, if you have any questions you have for us, make sure you submit those to the After Hours portal. That's at massresearchreview.com/ironculture. Of course, always good to support our dear friends at Elite FTS. If you go to Elite FTS, you will find wonderful, high-quality apparel and gear for the gym. If you need it, they probably got it. And if you go to elitefts.com and you use our code MRR10, stands for Mass Research Review 10, you will get a 10% discount off of most things in their store. And then, of course, if you really want to get on our good side and be a top tier gold star platinum level Diamond Club member of the Iron Culture audience, you can consider becoming a member of the Mass Research Review community. Every month, the first of the month, even holidays, Helms, even January 1st, we come out with a new issue talking about the newest, freshest, hardest hitting, most useful science related to fitness, training, nutrition, coaching, psychology. If it is under the umbrella of stuff a fitness enthusiast or coach would utilize, we cover it. So folks, that is how you can direct all of that giving spirit toward the people who really need it, which is us. And if you are charitable
100%.
enough, we can get more tiny spoons for Helms. Because am I correct in believing that that is a particularly miniature spoon?
Yes, this is one of the ways that I control my eating pace to get a better coupling between my hunger and satiety signaling, especially in the recovery period, which I
Hey,
am 4 weeks into.
I'm not knocking it. It works for many a people. Am I crazy? Correct me if I'm wrong. Did any of the tiny spoon work? Did they do any specific tiny utensil work out of what's his name's lab, Wansink?
Brian Wansink.
Yeah,
That I do not recall,
because they did tiny
nor
plates.
do
They
I.
did self-filling bowls. So this was their kind of genre of stuff. And one of the things that's really
Yeah.
upsetting about how, their whole lab kind of like dissolved and disintegrated and collapsed under its own weight is that there was some like really interesting work that they did. And yeah, I think unfortunately there were probably some useful strategies that a lot of people are tempted to kind of throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak.
Do you remember the specific episode that we did on this, Trex, where
Vaguely.
there was, yeah, so there was a replication attempt at the refilling soup bowls, and it was successful, and it basically said, hey, this one was legit.
Yeah.
And just as a reminder for those who have no idea what we're talking about, Brian Wansink is a nutritional behavior psychology researcher, I would say, kind of looking at consumer behavior and things that modulate energy intake. So subconscious energy intake type of deal. And there was a study they ran where people were consuming soup, but there was a tube under a table hooked up to it so it would constantly refill. So they were trying to see what behaviors modified how much soup someone would consume. And this was replicated, and it did show that visually you're modifying your behavior, not just purely based upon appetite signaling. There's, some visual feedback, and that was replicated, I think, just 2 years ago with tighter methods, and it actually did replicate. And the reason why that's relevant is Brian Wansink was largely drummed out of academia and kind of blacklisted, not for fully fabricating data and not conducting studies, but for being, at best, very liberal with analytical procedures and reporting of data to kind of make things look as impactful as possible, which I think is part of the
Yeah,
incentives and reward mechanisms. But I think we should be aware. There were many retractions, but not everything was retracted,
correct.
and we should expect probably similar directionality of many findings, but lower magnitudes. And in some cases, maybe things that were just, it was a null that was very null, but it became slightly positive and overblown in the paper that maybe wouldn't replicate. But I think we shouldn't fully throw it out the bathwater, just to give some context to what Trex was saying.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting because the story with Wansink, it all came to light because he basically, essentially the way I would put it using metaphorical terms, of course not using literal legal terms, but it was kind of like he committed like 1,000 misdemeanors rather than like, two catastrophic felonies as far as like research impropriety and methodology is considered. And so it was one of those things where it came to light because he was talking about it publicly. It was like he didn't even really he didn't seem to understand that what he was directing grad students and postdocs to do was actually wrong from a research ethics and statistics perspective. And so, yeah, it wasn't like one of those huge blowups where they're like, oh my God, this cancer research has been fabricating images in 100% of his papers. It wasn't like there was a researcher who I think it was a decade or two ago now at this point, there was an HIV researcher who was spiking his blood samples to just fraudulently produce data. And that person actually went to jail. And so it was nothing of that magnitude, but it was just kind of like, again, metaphorically speaking, you shoplifted a Twinkie from the convenience store, but you did it like 700 times. So we kind of don't trust you around the Twinkies anymore.
And even not metaphorically, it was stuff like telling grad students, postdocs, like, hey, let's stop collecting data because we found significance here, so we're good. And just run correlations on everything, and then we can go with what's significant. Not realizing that those are issues,
Right.
and having probably been trained in a highly publish or perish environment where you've stopped thinking about the philosophy underlying what you're doing, and you're just so focused on the output that it's just like, oh, did I get a less than 05? Well, that's the goal, right?
Yeah.
And I'm being a good researcher, and being a good publisher, as in publishing a high quantity of data, is not the same thing as being a good researcher.
That's what they tell me. All right, Helms.
That's what they say.
Ready
I have
to...
some more updates.
You got more updates. Okay, let's hear them.
I've got more updates. So, we are only days away from the release of the third edition of the Muscle and Strength Pyramid, so keep an eye out for that. We'll be sending emails out, and that'll be exciting. So that's coming real soon. Additionally, I want to give a big shout out to none other than Dr. Eric Trexler. That's you, buddy, because he has been pushing, now that we are both have a little more time, that I'm back from traveling, that we're going to have a little more intentionality and structure to the show, and we're excited about that. And we're doing some other things that I think are going to get some more like, I guess, cool content out for you guys, and just have this show be a little more informative. And we really want to, I would say, revive the culture. Now, those are very intentional words, and I will let you, dear listener, think of, what does revive culture mean? And shout out to my buddy Steve Hall, randomly, for no reason. I'll just put that out there. So, yeah, just a few little hints, seeds to plant, cool things we're doing. Still going to have our typical format of the Eric's talk and shop, but we're going to have a little more direction to it. Might break it up into segments. We're working that. And, yeah, we'll have some other guests still on the show as well, and some other faces around as well. And we're just excited for 2026. And after this episode, the next time you see either one of us, it will actually be, I think, pretty close to the new year. So we're just hoping everybody is enjoying the end of the year. And while we are going to have a slightly drama-filled episode today, we don't want to ruin your holiday spirit, and we're going to do it with the principle of charity, and we're going to look towards what's the positive things we can learn from some of the interactions Eric and I have had recently. Do you think that's a good way to frame it?
Yeah, I love that you dropped some Easter eggs in the Christmas season. So we're definitely mixing our growing up Catholic. I love the mixing of holidays here. No, I think that's good. Yeah, 2026, we are injecting a little more energy, a little more structure into the show, and getting the metaphorical defibrillator pads, placing them ever so gently on the chest of the show, and giving a violent jolt of electricity.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Love it.
All right, Helms. So let's dive into it here. Now, like you said, we're talking a little drama, but in a very non-dramatic way. That's the goal for the episode. We generally don't like to make the show about us necessarily, unless there's something fitness related that's worthwhile, i.e. the road to the stage, etc. We definitely don't.
I think you can get away with saying that. I don't know that I can get away with saying
Yeah. If we were doing this episode 6 months ago, I totally would have pulled it off. But yes, we generally try not to make the show too much about us or about the show itself. But we had both of us some interactions within the past week or two that kind of serve as a jumping off point, as kind of a, I don't know, kind of like a state of the union of where we're at in evidence-based fitness and the discourse surrounding it. So we're not here to complain or lament or shake our fist at the heavens, but we do want to provide some commentary, maybe hold up a mirror, maybe discuss about where we ought to be going as an online fitness community in terms of our discourse. So the real jumping off point here is that not so long ago, we did an episode with John Russin, right? And the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. So like, I never want to be the person who creates content and has the huge like bunny ears that collect only the negative feedback and completely overlook the positive. So a lot of the feedback was really positive. But there was some, I think, pretty pointed criticism. And so, Helms, we're human beings. We have phones. We get the little notifications, and all of a sudden you see, oh, a thing happened, right? Like I'm getting tagged in a few things more than normal, and something's happening here. And so I was like, oh, it looks like there's some criticism of the show. And so I expected to see, like, you know, my first reaction is always like, what did I stupidly say? What did I allow to be stupidly said and didn't step in and do any kind of critique or refereeing or redirecting? You know, what happened here? Was it something I said, something I didn't say, something I did, something I didn't do? And what was interesting about this particular instance of getting a little negative feedback, a little sharp criticism online, is that it actually wasn't about anything that was said on the show, anything that I said, that John said, really nothing that actually happened. And frankly, and if you feel like if I was talking with you about this on the internet and you think I'm calling you out individually, I'm not. This happened with multiple people. But I got feedback from a lot of people who said, I didn't like the episode. Also, I didn't listen to it. and that was kind of what I was like, I think this is something we should probably talk about a little bit on this show. And ultimately, at the end of the day, Helms, I think that we've been fairly independent, neutral parties. I mean, you can't be fully neutral on a topic you have an opinion about, but we have been pretty open about discussing various theories of pain science at the intersection of fitness, right? How does the way we move contribute to injury risk? To what extent? How does that all get wrapped in with pain? How should we be proactively or pragmatically approaching training with the concept of injury and pain in the back of our mind? All sorts of nocebo effects and biopsychosocial model versus the more biomedical model. I feel like we've kind of dug into all those topics, had people with very different views on the show, hosted a whole pain roundtable under the Iron Culture banner, if I'm not mistaken. Back when Omar was in the pilot seat, and I, of course, my internet dropped the second we started recording, so I made a huge contribution to that roundtable. But anyway, we've been, I think, pretty fair about really acknowledging where the biopsychosocial model really thrives in that conversation, while also pushing back against some of the really, I don't want to straw man it, but pushing back against some common interpretations of it that seem to really, really downplay the bio portion of the biopsychosocial model. And a lot of that critique comes from experience. I mean, Helms, the Mass Research Review, when I joined it, was a 4-person crew. And I'm pretty sure that I could go back in time and draw a point on the calendar where the full Mass crew years ago was made up of 4 people who had all squatted 500 pounds, who had all been coaches for many years, who all had all sorts of advanced certifications, who all had masters or PhDs in how the human body moves. And all 4 of us had been unable to comfortably squat for a year. Right? And so I think at that point, all of us were to some extent interested in this whole concept of like, well, is it the way you move that can kind of screw you up a little bit? What is this relationship between the way you move, the way you program your movements, the incidence of injury, recovery from injury, pain, etc., right? So we've all got personal experience in there, but I think that we've kind of navigated that debate in a pretty tactful way. But all of that windup, very long windup, is to say that a lot of the pushback that I received on that episode was really just that we would talk to John Russin. And I want to be very clear. I don't want anyone to walk away from this thinking that John Russin's catching strays from this episode, because I very much...
To be clear, so just to clarify what you just said there, because I think it wasn't 100% clear.
That makes sense.
The negative feedback we got was that we would dare to bring on John Russin.
Yeah.
Because we're supposedly an evidence-based podcast, and that by platforming someone like him, we are now less evidence-based.
Right.
And the way that was handled, the rationale, the justification, and when given pushback, I found to be surprisingly not evidence-based. And the threshold, and for what it was, is considered an appropriate person to platform and to discuss, I thought was wildly siloed and skewed, and also doesn't necessarily respect evolution of thought, and does not at all apply what I think is essential to evidence-based practice, which is the principle of charity, steel manning an argument, if you will.
Yeah.
So just to kind of get to the heart of it philosophically, so people know where we're coming from. And I would like to give some background specifically on, I think, this area of evidence-based practice and physiotherapy and physical therapy. I think that would be helpful, if
Sure.
you don't mind me
going
off on that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like you said, all 4 of us at Mass, we come from an era where the biomedical kind of paradigm talked about more. You would have a justification of why you probably shouldn't round your back, but we all knew as powerlifters, like, but you're gonna, and that's okay. Maybe the risks are slightly higher, but that's just the hit we take for powerlifting, right? But also, as powerlifters, we would catch strays all the time, like, oh, you shouldn't arch your back and do X, Y, and Z on bench press because you're gonna insert narrative around injury. So in many ways, without being directly exposed to this paradigm shift that's been happening in the physical therapy and physiotherapy world, I was aware of it and understood that things just didn't quite fit. I remember specifically having a physical therapist who worked out of a chiropractor's office ask me how I squatted, because I came in with some back pain, like literally 15 years ago. And he saw that my feet were slightly turned out, and he's like, oh, you produce way more force with your feet face forward. How much do you squat right now? And I was like, 500 pounds. And he was like, you probably squat, I think I saw some estimate like 20% more. So you'd be probably squatting 600 pounds just turning your feet forward. And I was like, wow, you really have no idea what the hell you're talking about. Nothing works that way. And I never went back into that office again. And manual therapy, a lot of this different work. The training a physical therapist got 20 years ago versus 10 years ago versus 5 years ago, and depending upon where, has drastically changed. And I think we went through a period initially where even though the understanding and the science is being updated, there was this huge, tumultuous, almost existential crisis that went on in this field. And this is me speaking as an outsider, just watching it, right? People thought that the tools they had used, which seemingly worked and made people feel better, were just smoke and mirrors. And people with maybe not the greatest training in actual statistics and understanding what the science is were reading science, which I think is an issue, and going, oh, wow, on average, return to play or return to normal habits or just, regression to the mean is predicting the same outcomes for surgery, right? And then kind of plastering that on all different body parts and kind of looking at that as the mean informs the individual, and going, like I'll give you a specific example. FAI surgery, on average, seems to produce a similar outcome to just waiting and training around it and doing physiotherapy. So I heard people say then you should just never be getting surgery generally, but not acknowledging that there are absolutely some cases which you determine in a comprehensive, effective, and evidence-based one-on-one situation where you go, actually, you know what? The pain experience and the imaging actually seems to match. We can do things like maybe actually, I don't know, injecting cortisol into the labrum to see if the pain actually goes away or is it caused by something else. There does seem to be an anatomical block. Range of motion and the Faber test, they're all pointing towards the exact same thing. We've tried physio for 3 years. That hasn't worked. Maybe this is a candidate for FAI surgery. And research fundamentally does not answer the question of people in that narrow population, how often does surgery work? But the answer would probably be something like a whole lot. But random person with pain who goes to a old school orthopedist whose immediate solution is let's do FAI surgery is probably going to have like a 10% success rate. And what we're looking at is an average. That nuance wasn't there. And that's improved over the last 10 years. But for that improvement to occur and for this existential crisis to get solved and for the egos of people who have been working for a long time and feeling like they've been successful and sometimes just babysitting regression to the mean or giving people a positive placebo effect and maybe not doing as much nocebo harm as they might be thinking and then getting into these very vicious fights with people who are younger and still in school but being exposed to these new ideas and feeling like, how dare you, and having some ego protection, lines in the sand started to get drawn very strongly, much in the same way as they have related to macronutrient tracking, RPE, volume, intensity, every other area of quote-unquote evidence-based practice, and it devolves into pseudoscientific tribalism. And while that has gotten a lot better, and I think there's been much more of a consensus and a moving back towards a better version of true evidence-based practice in this space, I think there was a lot of fallout, and some people got blacklisted, groups got formed, people got blocked, and one of the specific I got two specific comments that I noticed that were very emblematic, and in both cases I checked with the person and they had not listened to the episode. They were unwilling to engage with the episode. In one case, the person had stated that they got blocked by John a long time ago, a decade ago, which is right in the mix of when this stuff was at its peak height of tribalism and fighting. The other person I pushed, I said, oh, did you listen to the episode? And they were like, no. And I was like, well, did you have any issue with any of the claims? Because what you just said in your comment, that wasn't addressed at all in the episode. And they were like, no, this is my issue with this entire body of online work, which is basically, I really don't have a specific critique, but I've put this person into a box a long time ago, and I don't even want to actually think enough to type out on Facebook. Now, the thing is that could be a real critique. Like, there are some people right now, if you came to me and said, oh, I had this person on, I'd be like, that person's trash. And I wouldn't articulate more than that because they're that bad. And I'm trying to think like, okay, if that's my threshold for when I would just be like, no, absolutely not, and I don't even want to explain to you, just do a Google search, then why didn't our preliminary searches pick that up? Are we that out of touch as non-specialists? Maybe Trex, because you and I are both of the PhD, not the DPT variety of fake doctors, right? And I do acknowledge that we're going to have blind spots. But I mean, I also work with DPT Dr. Nick Liccamelli, who is, if I would say anything, heavily aligned with the more modern view of pain science. He's a guy who loves barbell medicine. We've had both Jordan and Austin on. We've had not only Dr. Nick Liccamelli on multiple times, but also some of his colleagues, Sam Spinelli, like many people who would identify as being in the more modern interpretation of, and at least incorporation of to that, but also being experienced practitioners. And anytime we have a potential guest, you and I are both very risk averse. The first thing we do is see, has this person done any egregious things that we're not aware of, ethically or morally?
Yeah, I was Google first name, last name,
canceled.
Scandal. Yeah.
Yeah, or cancel. I look for both, and I also do some of the typical flags like
arrested,
sexism, racism, arrested, exactly, all that good stuff. So the first thing we do is make sure we're not platforming someone who is actually a violent, dangerous, or bad human, right? And then the second thing we do is we actually make sure that if we don't have a relationship with them, we don't know, and especially if they're outside of our field, we look to see, are they saying and promoting things that seem unreasonable? So I don't know about you, but I absolutely went to, John's Instagram, looked through his content, and nothing caught my eye as like having nocebo-based pain narratives or anything like that. I mean, it doesn't mean I necessarily agree with everything he said, but one of the key things to me that I thought was really valuable is this is a guy who's been a trainer for decades in multiple environments, and he's highly pragmatic, and he focuses on what works. And in the conversation, and I wasn't there, it was you and him, there was nothing. And even so, to the credit of one of the people who was critiquing the episode, I asked them, well, go listen to the episode. Like, let me know. Did we not hold his feet to the fire? Did we miss anything? And he was like, basically, no, that episode was fine. But he said some other stuff in the past before I got blocked that I had an issue with. And they did back off to their credit. But I think that knee-jerk response, and the biggest issue in my mind is that the unwillingness to fathom that someone may have changed their mind and evolved their thinking in the past 10 years is incredibly ironic and problematic, because this is a field that's entirely shifted its practice over the last 10 years. Yet you're going to hold someone to beliefs that they might have had 10 years ago and assume that they still have them today and that they are dogmatic about them and doing harm. So that assumption, I think, is actually inherently not evidence-based. And more importantly, let's say that this was someone who is not evidence-based, but it's out there influencing culture and actually causing harm, and you have basically blacklisted them, don't interact with them, and have no ability to engage with them because of probably the way you're interacting with them. How does that change the field? Or does it just draw greater division and push people into a corner and force them to do, just kind of rally the wagons, circle the wagons, and repeat the same things to the same people? So ultimately, you have to ask yourself, is the way I'm approaching this, if it is actually a bad actor or a heavily misinformed actor, improving the space I'm in, or is it just further drawing boundaries and just I feel better without seeing it? And I'm going to say, keep them out of the conversation. That's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and to build off that, a couple of the kind of flavors or genres of critiques that I heard, again, I much like you, I was like, listen, I'm always happy to take accountability for things I've said and done, and even in the context of podcasting, I'm even willing to take accountability for things that I let slide and didn't push back on. But a lot of the stuff was more like you said, either I, didn't like John's work 10 years ago and then kind of made up my opinion and haven't revisited. Other stuff was, okay, I did listen to the episode and it seemed a lot more reasonable than his tweets, or not even more reasonable, more nuanced than his tweets. And I was like, well, yeah, that's what happens when you sit down and talk for 70 minutes rather than, however many characters you get these days. So a lot of it was like, well, now that I've actually listened to him elaborate on his thoughts, I don't think he's necessarily all that bad, which is good. That's the point of, sitting down with someone and saying, hey, let's talk through some of these topics and see if we actually have more common ground than disagreement. So yeah, I thought it was, I think it was just a really interesting way of looking at, as you were alluding to, kind of what is your threshold for saying that a person needs to essentially be banished from the evidence-based space? Like we won't even let you in to talk to you, knowing we'll push back if we disagree, So I think that was one thing that really jumped out to me. And, if I saw someone who was, out there talking a lot about a topic, and I think that their work is very misguided, in my opinion, the best thing that could happen would be that would actually come to light. And I'm not saying this in response to John, because like you, I looked at his I didn't go back 11 years because I don't care what he it's really, as long as it wasn't like absolutely reprehensible on a moral level. I don't care what he was producing 11 years ago. I want to know within the last, several months, maybe last year or two, what does this content look like? And, there's rarely going to be a practitioner where we look back and say, every single thing you've posted in the last 18 months, I co-sign fully without reservation and with no caveats, right? But I looked through and I was like, yeah, like I have no qualms, and this goes nowhere near the threshold of where I would say it's too dangerous. we can't talk to him. But no, if there was a person that I thought was just consistently off the mark and had a large platform, because his platform's larger than ours by a substantial margin, the best thing that could happen is that person enters evidence-based spaces and actually gets pushback publicly, such that people might start to see, oh, well, when people actually interrogate those ideas, they don't really seem to hold up or get defended very well, right? And that certainly wasn't the case in the episode, because John and I chatted, and there was nothing he said where I felt like I had to go out and say, wait, hold up. And that leads me to another thing, which I think is pertinent for Iron Culture and the way we do interviews, which is Helms. I don't think it's available yet, but you interviewed Ronnie Coleman, right?
Yes.
Did you grill him on the latest meta-analyses to kind of hold his feet to the fire and make him justify his training?
I did.
Yeah.
The interview didn't go well. People will see that.
Yeah.
So I learned from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
No,
you
of
get
course not.
you get what I'm saying is that,
Yeah.
With evidence-based practice, we have, however you want to envision it, as a funnel or a Venn diagram, whatever. But there's three elements to it. There's the scientific research. There's the what we're hearing from clinicians, and then there's, kind of individualizing to the needs of the patients. And so when we do interviews, like if we want to talk to a top level bodybuilder about what they've been doing, what they've been up to, we of course will intervene and interject and talk about, oh, that seems compatible with the science. Oh, that doesn't, but I'm glad it works for you. And that's really interesting to hear your experience. But we don't just hand it over and say, well, screw the science. I mean, you heard it here, guys, right? So the way that we go into conversations with people is very different if they're an athlete, if they're a practitioner, or if they're a researcher. And I think that also, if you go back and listen to the episode, is really clear that I don't think we talked about really any research specifically in the episode. It was more, you've been working in this area for a while. You have this book out that talks about your approach to training. And so I don't think that, I think there's a way to talk to people who have clinical experience or practical experience. That doesn't mean that we need to, say, well, I guess we're no longer evidence-based because we're willing to hear out a clinician who's talking about the way that they approach things.
Yeah, and a good 20, 30 minutes of the podcast. And then now I think we can get on to the meta conversation after this. It doesn't just sound like we're defending or apologists if someone was to give us the least charitable interpretation here. But there was a lot of value in the first 20 to 30 minutes because you were talking about, what does it look like for someone who starts with a bachelor's of physical therapy and then decides that they want to work with athletes, and how do you do that?
Right.
And this is a really important conversation, like across multiple fields. Not everyone is willing to go the entrepreneurial route. It was a scary thing for me to go, oh, I kind of want to be like Lane Norton, or I kind of want to be like Joe Klimczewski. There's no program that says become the online bodybuilding coach science communicator. Ironically, there actually are now. You can get a master's degree in like bodybuilding science, and there are literal degrees in science communication.
And even certifications in coaching bodybuilders. So like, you can now...
We've been a part of.
Yeah.
Not a thing, which don't get me wrong, cool, but there's minimal representation for the like the ideal, where am I going to go? Who do I want to be? And I think many people, that's just not kind of their personality or what they're exposed to. So they're looking for one of the more set tracks, and they want to kind of modify it to work with who they want to. And it's very difficult, say, as an RD or a DPT, to find yourself working in professional sport. And it is a highly desired outcome, but a very exclusive space. And to listen to him talk about how he got from where he was to being a trainer and working in elite sport, I think was very useful to anyone who's considering a career. And spent a lot of time talking about that. Then you talked about his experience working with high-level athletes, the difference between working with general pop, working with strength athletes, and what seems to have worked. I think if we can't talk about that, then what are we doing here?
It is iron culture. Yeah. It's a good point.
Right?
Yeah.
So anyway, that I think, because I wasn't there, which almost baffled me even more, because I listened to the episode and then I saw some of the feedback and I was like, what? Like, did you even? Oh no, you didn't listen to the episode, right?
Yeah.
And then I went and searched him again. I was like, what did I miss? Where are these huge, obvious infractions on all things logical and scientific?
Yeah.
And you could find the critiques of things, but you couldn't really find the initial content, you know? So it just became apparent to me that this had become one of those scenarios where lines were drawn. And I'm sure there are things that Dr. Russin has said that I would disagree with and maybe push back on. But I don't know when they were. They're hard to find. They're clearly not representative of what he does on a daily basis or what he claims. And I think another thing, I will say this. I think pain-free performance as a title triggers people.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah.
I think absolutely. And I think that speaks to kind of the clickbait, drama, rage bait style of production of content, which wasn't intentional on our place. That is literally the name of his his book and his certification.
Yeah.
It wasn't us just trying to farm, these negative comments.
Yeah.
But that is a real thing that happens in the industry, because, I agree. Like, we shouldn't expect to be pain-free. Pain is a normal part of life. But if you listen to the episode, he contextualizes it very well. Like, I say pain-free performance, and then he talks about what that means and why he uses that terminology. And, I can understand if someone's like, oh, that could be interpreted this way. But that's different than saying, I'm going to choose to interpret it that way and not listen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And to your point, like, to the folks that I did have some dialogue with and said, like, okay, but let's not hold him to stuff that happened 10 years ago. Let's talk what he's doing now. What are your major critiques? And like, it really boiled down to, if I get people to kind of specify things, it was more like, I think his warm up is too long. And like, I think he should progress people faster in his exercise progressions. And like, sure, fair quibbles, but that's not like, it's very dangerous it's dangerous for you to have platformed him and to talk about his experience as a clinician. So we're not going to, like you said, we're not going to dwell on it. We're going to move on to kind of the bigger meta narrative here. But I just want to wrap it up by saying, first of all, my whole thing, Helms, ever since I got into writing articles scientifically and on the internet and podcasting, is if you don't want to be critiqued, shut up. Don't publish if you don't want people to voice their opinions on what you publish. So I think any criticism of the podcast is fair game, obviously, but I did want to at least kind of shine a light on, like, listen, like, if you're going to critique the pod, I'd prefer you critique the pod, like, listen to the episode. And if you feel we let someone really get away with, all sorts of chaos, then take issue with that and take issue with me, but not, hey, this guy blocked me on the internet 10 years ago, and therefore I don't think you should be talking to him. Like, if we're going to do evidence-based, let's stick to the evidence. And let's make sure that we contextualize evidence-based practice as having 3 different units, which all, ultimately come together in that kind of funnel shape. So, Helms, are we good to move on here? And I do want to say, again,
absolutely.
I just, because we've like vaguely talked about it, I just want to say once again, I do appreciate John for coming on the show. I thought he conducted himself well. I thought he shared a lot of value with the audience. So the last thing I want is for him to feel like he's catching strays of like, we're talking about him like he's this like polarizing figure. I just don't really think that that's the case for the vast majority of fitness. I just think there's one particular kind of niche that really takes issue, like you said, probably with more so just the concept of pain-free performance as a brand.
100%.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think some good things to dovetail here is how ideally these types of disagreements or different viewpoints or different models should operate, and how they actually do in truly evidence-based circles. I know you had some things you wanted to say about that.
Oh yeah. I've had a couple recent like experiences. One of which I can't go into too much detail about because, we academics, the secrecy of peer review is, the noblest thing in the world. So we couldn't possibly breach that trust. But I happen to know for a fact that I recently had a paper in peer review, and I'm virtually certain it was getting reviewed. The paper was about the constrained energy expenditure model, and I'm pretty sure, even though it's blinded review, you can sometimes tell just from contextual factors. I'm pretty certain it was being reviewed by someone who is very vocally not on board with the constrained energy expenditure model. And they gave us a tough review. They pointed at things that they felt needed more substantiation, pointed at things that they felt needed more caveats and clarifications. But at the end of the day, they didn't say, I hate this theory and therefore it has no place in the literature, rejected without reading, right? They went through and said, okay, I think in the future when we have more evidence that this thing is going to completely crash and burn, and of course we disagree with that, but nonetheless, when it comes to, does this meet the merits of a high quality publication? Indeed it does, even though I think this theory is going to lose out in the long run. And so ultimately that paper was accepted. But there's even bigger areas where people with really substantial major disagreements have come together. So, and it's not always pretty. Sometimes it actually gets really contentious, but there is a paper in Nature Metabolism 2024 where it's all about, what are the causal models of what's driving obesity? You've got Kevin Hall, David Ludwig, and Gary Taubes, and John Speakman all on the same paper. And Lord knows what that revision process must have looked like, of trying to get an actual draft that people would say yes to.
Man.
But they came together and co-authored work. And I actually have a paper right now that I'm just finishing up where it's really a major consensus paper. And, I think the big overarching point of this is if we want to have a consensus in evidence-based fitness about pain, it's not going to be by drawing the line in the sand and picking which side you're on. It's going to be by having actual roundtables of opposing opinions and having some of this, pardon the metaphor, but cross-pollination of ideas where we're kind of sharing back and forth and trying to find some middle ground. So I was the lead of this consensus paper, and I brought on people that I know strongly disagree with each other. It was like, I don't even know if this is historically true, but I think I heard that Abraham Lincoln on his cabinet brought in people that kind of were very different politically. Maybe I'm making that up. Don't quote me on that. But my idea was, well, if we're going to try to produce a consensus on this, then we need both sides of this debate to be present so that we can actually form that consensus. Otherwise, we are basically providing half of a consensus that ignores the other half of the field, right? And so that made my life a lot harder, and this paper has taken a lot more time than I'd like to actually put together. But that's how it's supposed to be done when you're going to do evidence-based fitness, is you need to actually have some opposing viewpoints, as long as they are reasonably substantiated and have some degree of credence. It doesn't mean we need to bring in like the total wacky fringe beliefs into every major, paper. But I think probably, Helms, the best possible example of this was there was a paper that I've talked about previously, or a journal issue in Royal Society Publishing. It was the Royal Society B journal that they have. But they had this big conference about the drivers of obesity, and the conference then gave way to this special issue, and they brought in all these different people, and they basically said, David Ludwig, you write a paper telling us why the carbohydrate carbohydrate insulin model is the driver of obesity. And, they brought in experts to talk about, you talk about the protein leverage hypothesis and why that's the big secret. You talk about why food insecurity is the main driver. So they have a whole issue of people making fundamentally different arguments about what is really the major driver of obesity. And I love Herman's paper in that Herman Poncer, because he was like, I think primates just get fat. And he's talking about all this other stuff. It's like, yeah, we could talk about, protein leverage this, ultra processed that, socioeconomic and psychological and social factors here. But it seems like primates just kind of get chubby if you put them in a zoo and give them plenty of food, But
monkeys be eaten.
What's that? Yeah, exactly.
Be eaten.
They do. So, but the whole idea was, rather than saying we're going to kind of retreat into our silo with the people we agree with so that we can bolster our defense maximally, let's actually be vulnerable and open up to some different opinions, and let's battle it out in a way where we say, here are all the ideas. Let's see which ones win out here. And so I think if we, I think what really got me onto this topic was in evidence-based fitness online. We see this kind of trend of gravitating toward this common lament that like exercise science is unserious or evidence-based fitness is unserious. But, a lot of the folks that are making that claim are aggressively disregarding the type of engagement that actually characterizes a serious field of science, which is, let's actually bring some of these opinions out and really discuss them and have some dialogue.
Yes. And inherently what that means is engaging with ideas, not people.
Yeah.
Right? And making decisions about ideas, not people. And that avoids a lot of the things we talked about earlier. And there's a really important distinction between being cynical and being skeptical. When you are a cynic, you are going after people because you have assumptions and beliefs about their intentions and about the intentions of most people. And the way we gauge people in the world is largely informed by the experiences we had, and not to be too attacky to anyone who might self-identify as a cynic, the way you see yourself and the way you think you would operate in certain scenarios. Maybe the worst parts of you that you're not trying to be. I'm not saying, that you're just a bad person if you're cynical about other people. But poisoning the well is kind of a default setting, and when you go after the character rather than what they're saying, whether the person realizes it or not, that means that they're trying to limit exposure to the other ideas rather than saying, you know what, if this idea holds water or holds merit, then the evidence should bear that out. And I should steelman it, see what we can take from it, apply skepticism, not cynicism, to it, and actually see what happens when we blow on this model. Is it a house of cards, or is it actually robust to the big bad wolf of evidence coming by and blowing, right?
Yeah.
And an interesting thing has happened in kind of our online space in the last few, I'd say last year, where it's really, really come to a head, is where we've held up some highly, highly cynical people as kind of our Batmans, our righteous arbiters of truth, and the people who can weed out the bad actors and protect us from these charlatans and point out these people who are ruining evidence-based fitness. And I think we've unfortunately let in some wolves in sheep's clothing, and we've let in some people who have maybe not these specific ideas in some cases that they have or claims, but their entire philosophy and the way they operate is what will lead you down a bad path. Because when you don't operate with the principle of charity, and when you address people and not actual ideas, your own ego eventually becomes a barrier in something to you being right, because you're so invested in winning, you're so invested in rooting out the bad people and you being the self-righteous good person, that you are willing to do whatever it takes to tear down someone who has triggered you for whatever reason, or that you feel is self-righteously needs to be removed and blackballed from the space. And this actually is empirically shown. So there are psychometric scales that measure critical thinking ability, IQ, cynicism, and even gullibility. And they are all separate, although semi-related scales. And the interesting thing, and I've talked about this before, and there's good papers on this if you want to read about it, that IQ is unfortunately a reasonably fixed trait. It doesn't change a whole lot, but it kind of measures kind of like your raw processing ability to some degree, not exclusively, and there are many critiques of IQ, and I'm not going to claim that that isn't the case. But what is a trainable trait is critical thinking, your ability to critically evaluate things. You might not be able to do it as fast as someone else, or come to the same conclusions, or gather the right data, but you can absolutely teach critical thinking as a skill, and that is one of the most exciting, hopeful, non-cynical, optimistic things you can say about the human race, is that we can recalibrate ourselves to be slower thinkers, as Daniel Kahneman might say, and to evaluate things not just by an impulsive knee-jerk response. Now, here's the crazy thing, though. Skepticism and critical thinking, they predict being less likely to be taken in by frauds, to believe in the paranormal or things that have been proven, and to not hold conflicting beliefs. So some people actually do, certain conspiracy theorists, they hold two conflicting beliefs, which, because they fit their narrative and because they're bad critical thinkers, if you actively, objectively viewed them, they couldn't both be true. And I'm going to use and I'm not saying whether there exists this on both sides of the political spectrum in the U.S., but a common one, just so people understand what I'm talking about, is that in the more conservative-leaning right kind of wing way of looking at things, you typically get a narrative of big government as clunky, bureaucratic, inefficient, and doesn't get things done. And then maybe just one step adjacent to that, you'll get, and also, they're globalists, and there's a shadow government that is manipulating things that we need to fight back against, and that big government is secretly pulling the strings, and, we need to have a strong Second Amendment and the ability to overthrow this corrupt government that is insidiously everywhere. Got to drain the swamp, got to watch out, globalists, all this conspiracy theory stuff. And I have heard people who are actually high on the IQ just switch between these two narratives for whatever fits the bias at the time.
Just to clarify, the idea that large governments are incompetent and bumbling and can't manage a country, and yet they have a sophisticated, very fine touch on organizing these global affairs, that everything goes off without a hitch, and they are just so slick with it that they get away with it all, right?
Exactly. And, like this narrative was huge during COVID because both were happening. Either the response to COVID was an engineered pandemic that had political ulterior motives to take away our freedom, or this is the most incompetent thing I've ever seen. It's not evidence-based. Why are we wearing masks? This is so stupid. Why are we letting these bureaucracies run our lives? You can't have both. You must choose one because they're fundamentally incompatible. Yet people who are highly gullible, which correlates with cynicism, and doesn't correlate, IQ is independent. This is why you can have very intelligent people who can heavily rationalize idiotic beliefs, right? That's the thing. You can construct these not logically consistent narratives, but very complex narratives that can be very convincing. And if you couple that with someone who has a big platform, it's charming, it's charismatic, you can see a lot of people come over to certain pretty wild conspiracy theories. But anyway, cynicism predicts gullibility. It predicts holding conflicting beliefs, and it predicts having paranormal beliefs. It's not associated with IQ. So you can have these people, and they exist in the fitness industry right now, who are highly intelligent if we're talking about IQ, but because of their ego and because of their cynicism, they have some huge blind spots, and more importantly, the entire philosophy that they're giving you, while being in the guise of being evidence-based, is actually entirely counter to the underlying philosophy of science, of being an empiricist, of having curiosity and not taking the logical fallacy of addressing the person, but addressing the individual claims and saying, does this idea make sense? Because if you have to resort to destroying the source of the information, defamation, libel, rather than addressing the claim, then you don't actually care about claims. You care about winning, whether you realize it or not. And we've gotten to a place now in evidence-based fitness where the tribalism is so strong. And frankly, even when the tribalism isn't that strong, the content creators themselves are sometimes engineering fake beefs. We have rage bait, we have clickbait, we have content creators, especially on YouTube, contacting each other and saying, hey, do you want to run a 2026 beef? I think that would help both our engagement. And let's pretend to hate each other for a while, and then we're going to have a reconciliation, and hopefully both of our audiences can grow. But the consumer is just buying into this and seeing this as the norm. And it is essentially just another version of tabloids, reality TV. It's just in the modern era. And it's happened now in the evidence-based space, even though it's fundamentally, and I say that with quotes, not evidence-based to be doing this.
Yeah, yeah. I think, I think what you're, I agree. I'm not going to say like, what you're trying to say, but when you talk about that, one of the things that jumps out to me is, this push to being very cynical often then redirects the topic of conversation to, instead of being about good or bad ideas, being about good or bad people with good or bad intentions. And once you make that jump, I think it's a very natural flow straight into tribalism at best, where you just say, okay, I don't want to deal with all the bad people with the bad ideas that are driven by bad motives, so I'm going to stay in my silo, and that's that. But at worst, I think because now it's about people and motives rather than the actual substance of their arguments, then it really is a direct flow into what is really more soap opera than evidence-based thought, right? And so I think that's kind of what I was getting at without getting at it when we did an episode. It was actually a solo episode because you abandoned your post as per usual, but about the whole like Mike Israetel drama. And when I looked at a lot of the internet discourse among folks who would, I think would purport to say like, I'm really into evidence-based fitness because I'm a huge nerd, right? But then I would look at like what people are posting about, and it would be like, I can't wait to see what influencer A says about influencer B taking position X about influencer C. And I was like, I think that's more of a soap opera narrative than it is there is a robust critique of a dissertation. What does that actually mean for how I view the work of the individual who wrote it? Given that I don't actually interpret their original research, but a dissertation is a demonstration of how good you are at doing original research rather than building training programs or nutrition programs or whatever. So instead of actually kind of dealing with the bigger picture, like substance of the topic of how much weight do we put into a dissertation, who's involved in approving a dissertation, what does it mean if, all the conversations that we kind of got into in that episode, I was not seeing a lot of talk about that in evidence-based fitness, even though those are what you would actually consider the evidence-based concerns that would arise from the drama. And instead, it became a very character-driven drama for its own sake of who's going to say this, how is that person going to react to what this person said about it. And yeah, it was all about the characters, as if, like you said, it was some kind of reality television show, more so than how do I now contextualize information from various sources and how do I move on with this new information.
Yeah, I got asked many times by people I respect, which actually made me more depressed than the fact that it was a thing to even talk about that it exists, because I have no illusions that there aren't insanity. And like, I'm 42. Like Jerry Springer was on when I was a kid. Like, this is nothing new in humanity.
Right.
Like drama and people who just feed off negativity and they just spiral down into it. And it's just like, I want to watch the train wreck. That's never been me, but I understand that's a fundamentally human thing, and a lot of people get off on that, for better or for worse, for their own psyche. You can probably tell what I think, whether it's better or worse.
Yeah.
But a lot of people who I would see as being in the evidence-based space, like actual postgraduate students, practitioners, people with PhDs, they come up to me like, Eric, what do you think about all this? I'm like, it's as little as I possibly can. They look at me like it's weird that I'm not following it. I'm like, no, I'm aware of what's going on. I'm not going to invest any time and energy into that because I'm quite interested in like what's the next paper or what's going on. Like this is a I have other things that I watch if I want to be immersed in drama. I'll watch some video games. If I want some mindless things that first I don't want them to suck me in and be negative. Like I'd rather watch something that is fun. Um, we all have our quote unquote guilty pleasures, but the fact that the guilty pleasure is now just supposedly evidence-based people talking smack about each other and doing response videos, and that's actually seen as that's part and parcel of it, that depressed me, Trex. It wasn't the existence of it. It wasn't that, oh my God, the dissertation was bad, or oh, what did they say, or what, I can't believe this is happening. I thought we were all committed to the science. No, I've seen that there's been huge, strong egos in the fitness-based space, and people are more interested in being right and winning than being correct for the dawn of time, right? And that happens within academia. All that happens, right? I'm not naive. I just have no interest in focusing on this. And I was honestly depressed that so many people were spending so much time and energy and actually thinking this was important because it's not. And I don't
Yeah,
care what the argument is.
and
The
to
only important thing is that we've gotten here and that it's sad and that it takes our eye off the ball.
and,
And that people have lost track that it's literally not just what does the abstract say or is it factually correct, but that we have to be following the underlying philosophy of empirical science. And last time I checked, you can't prove and know p less than 0.05 what someone's intentions or motives were. If you are heavily focused on the other person, you're basically saying that I know better than everyone else. Oh, and by the way, I'm psychic, just trust me. Unless you have some really damn good track record of them being intentionally malicious. Like a liver king who's saying, I'm natty, never did anything like this. This is all just because I eat every part of the animal. Oh, here's my emails that got leaked of me actually getting a crap ton of steroids. Not, well, I get the impression that this person is just a bad actor. Like, I get that helps you fit your narrative, but you show me the proof, Mr. Evidence Based.
yeah, yeah. I think to kind of give an example of like what would it have taken for us to be wall to wall coverage on that whole unfolding drama. It's actually very clear to me, which is if that dissertation was a linchpin in a critical theory that we had been publishing about for a while and writing articles about and making content about, if we said, oh my God, a massive brick in a wall of a theory that we have been discussing and essentially endorsing for a long time has now crumbled. Dear God, what do we make of this? Because now you are revisiting the evidence, more so than following the drama of who's involved with it. And again, even when we talk about, this was unintentional because it was off the cuff, but when we talk about like the Brian Wansink stuff, very minimally do we talk about the characters involved, and more so we're just like, so what does that mean about little spoons and tiny plates and refilling soup, right? And so I think that is ultimately where we really set ourselves up for trouble if we are using evidence-based fitness as our venue for entertainment rather than education. And I think, Helms, you and I, not because it's strategic necessarily, not because it's some holier than thou kind of stance or posture, I think you and I just don't enjoy being involved in the drama at all. And so as a result, we don't really traffic in it at all. And with the way evidence-based fitness is kind of trending, that's very much to our detriment in terms of the attention economy, but it's very much to our favor in terms of just like not being miserable.
Yeah, and I get that this could come across as an ethical or a maturity based high horse position. But I don't think I'm better than anybody else, you know.
I'm sure you're
And
not.
only person I know I'm better than is someone else with my same name who I'm talking to right now.
Yeah.
You can use your own evidence based lens to figure out who that is. But I get that it comes across that way. I understand it, especially if you're someone who's followed it and it feels judgmental towards you or triggering. And like I said, I am human too. I have vices. I have these things. And I also recognize that the choices I make online hurt my bottom line, and that I am not making the best decisions as far as the degree that I engage in clickbait and these things. And if you did see me and Trex lean heavily into this, you would know that, man, mass is doing badly, and we have decided to do whatever we need to do to pay our mortgage, you know?
Yeah.
So maybe if we were content creators coming up in the current era and we hadn't inherited some of the prior era where our clout was holding us and carrying us forward, where we got to be above the fray. That is possible. And I don't want to make this about us taking a moral high ground. I am genuinely concerned that people think that evidence-based practice is purely about the research, and that it is a moral thing to be right. Because those things are inherently not evidence-based and will lead you astray eventually on some topic, and you won't know it. And you will get progressively more wrong over time as you close more and more doors, right? And that's what happens to cynics. And if you look at people who fall down this kind of rabbit hole into, and I think we all know some people, especially some of them came out of it post-COVID. I've had friends who, whether it was 9/11 conspiracies, the moon landing conspiracy, COVID-related conspiracies, vaccines, who went down that path and started to distrust certain avenues of information. Like it's a bad thing if you just distrust the general concept of science, because, man, that is not an institution. That is a way of thinking. And you can find, there are empiricists in ancient India coming up with this who didn't call themselves empiricists at the same time as this was being developed in Western culture and in other places. This is a fundamentally human thing. How do we get better at observing things and isolating cause and effect so that we can actually live and survive and not do crazy crap and die of toothaches in our 30s, right? This is fundamental to society developing. So when you decide to opt out of that because a conspiracy theory led you there, you've now taken away your best tool to prevent you from being opened up to other ones. And sometimes it takes a family intervention, an extreme bout of depression, or when reality actually confronts you with something that actually has a material effect on your life. Like, oh, wow, my kid died of measles. Tragic things. So I have seen friends of mine dive in, it gets really crazy, and some part of them goes, wait, hold on. This doesn't make any sense, and they have to recalibrate, and they come out. And I think that's an unfortunate thing of the modern information age, is you can get looped into one of these silos so quickly, and especially with the death of expertise and the fact that you can have very intelligent people with seemingly rational explanations in an area that you're not an expert in, draw you into something. And you know what? It's scary. I get it. But man, once you open that door, you're potentially opening up a lot of others that you didn't realize that get progressively crazier. So that's what concerns me. It's like, if you make these cynics your heroes, you are potentially opting into a pretty gnarly path.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I also want to acknowledge, I have had those situations where, I've seen a content creator who maybe I'm just not very fond of, and they make a post that conflicts with things I've said in the past. And then I dig into it and I'm like, no, screw this, this person. I don't like them. They're not in my comfortable silo. And it's kind of like, some people, as we retreat into our silos, it's kind of like people who watch the news to feel good. You know what I mean? So rather than to kind of get the vibe of what's going on, they have their preferred news channel, and they're like, I know I'm never going to hear anything on this channel that makes me feel uncomfortable, right? And so I think sometimes we can get that way with fitness content, and we're all to some extent susceptible to that, I think. And there's been some select instances in the past where I see someone who's not in my little comfort bubble, who makes content that conflicts with something I've said in the past or a stance I've held in the past, and I go, forget that person. They're not in my little comfortable bubble. They're full of it. I've disagreed with them on many things in the past, and then I find out they're right. Like, I actually look into it and I go, and honestly, Helms, I'm not going to lie. If we were all, moral high horse, better than everyone else, then I would be completely, I would have no feeling attached to that. It would be totally dispassionate. And it's not, Helms. I'll be like, crap. It's not just that I was wrong, but I don't like being wrong against blank, you know? And
Yes.
it's kind of like when you make content, when people criticize it and they're just wrong, it doesn't hurt. But when they're right, it stings, you know? And so I think we all have to acknowledge that this is just part of being human and engaging in a space where ideas are flying and content is being created. We're naturally going to gravitate towards certain nodes within this ecosystem. And there's going to be other nodes across the spectrum that we generally disfavor. But we have to be really careful about never engaging in those ideas. And in many cases, I think we'll find that we can still gravitate toward where we said, yeah, I generally enjoy this little content ecosystem because it's where I get a lot of stuff that generally fits my mental model of the world and I find it useful and practical, and that's totally fine. You just want to be very careful about how high you build the wall that keeps you in there and how many sides are there to that wall, to the point that you're not just completely surrounded by brick that you can't see over. Because ultimately that's going to put you in a position where it's just going to limit your growth moving forward, you know? And, we've had, I don't have to like, sugarcoat it or anything, but like we've had debates, right? Like that are public. So I'm not going to, I'm not telling any secrets when I tell you that I have had very strong disagree, like one that comes to mind, and not to like, feed a fed horse, as they say. I've had very strong disagreements with Menno Henselmans and Mike Israetel about certain topics. But I have never gone so far as to say, well, you two are charlatans because you disagree.
Yeah.
What we did was we got together and hashed it out and found some common ground, found other areas where we politely said, I guess we'll agree to disagree. And still to this day, I have a tremendous, relationship. I don't interact much with Menno, but he's got one of the few like fitness Instagram pages that I frequent because I think it's very valuable. I think he provides a really good update of what's going on in the research, just highlighting interesting studies that come out. And then Mike, I interact with him all the time, right? And so like there's a way to do this where you can disagree strongly with people, even across multiple domains and across multiple topics, and you could still say, nonetheless, I think we're all in this to kind of gravitate toward the generation of good ideas and consensus building that helps people. And we can have areas where we disagree, areas where we agree. The more we disagree, the more we should talk, not the less we should talk. And I think that's kind of the main point that I would leave listeners with.
I think that's incredibly well said. And I think it's really good to have a little bit of self-awareness because you can feel the difference between being intellectually challenged in a way that doesn't trigger you. Like, oh, really? That's not what I thought. And being intellectually challenged in a way that does trigger you and it feels like a threat. And you immediately look for reasons why it's not right. You get this sense of frustration, anger, if you're really honest, maybe even a little bit of fear. That is that ego protection, or even an existential protection, which often, co-vary. Trex, have you heard of the just world fallacy?
I have not.
So the just world fallacy is just the idea that we live in a just world, and the things that happen are supposed to happen. And in many ways, ironically, if you believe in a just world, you probably are someone who has a strong sense of morals and ethics. But what it often results in, because unfortunately, I hate to tell you this, Trex, we don't necessarily live in a just world, is that you blame victims. That's a really common thing. If you can't fathom why a woman would get raped, just to get really kind of dark and nasty all of a sudden, your knee-jerk reaction, whether you want to admit it to yourself or not, is why? What did she do something? Like, because I don't want to live in a world. It's an existential threat where that just happens, but it does, and you see this a lot in various ways and avenues. Is your knee-jerk reaction and the comments you'll see online, and that's where people have less of a filter. They're anonymous and they're just doing it without necessarily thinking about it. Is victim blaming comes from that. And if you don't think too deeply about it, you see someone blame a victim, you just think they're an evil, awful person. And now sometimes when they do it, like, oh, they deserve that, I don't know shit. Like, they are just a shit poster if they're even a real person and not a bot. But if they're asking questions about, like, well, what did they do to this? Like, what happened? Like, where were they? Why were they there at night? Like, that 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 response, I notice it comes from people who have actually really strong sense of morals, and I find myself doing it sometimes too, and I try to be really aware of it. And I think there's a version of that that is occurring here and occurs all the time. But you can feel that when it happens because it's a protective mechanism. It's a way that you can maintain a feeling of safety in the world you live in. And we're humans, like we are just survival machines. And believe it or not, if you surround yourself with fitness content, and you're thinking about lifting, and you put a lot of effort and energy into this, and you believe okay, here's how I know to grow muscle and be healthy and have fitness and teach my clients and have a livelihood, that becomes your world. And threats to that can feel like a threat to survival because that's how we're programmed. And then you can get that, oh my God, like this person is saying that volume is not related to muscle growth, or every study I've seen is due to swelling. And instead of going, oh, that's an interesting possibility, let me evaluate that, you just reject it out of hand. And I get that response. And I'm giving an example of how I notice myself responding to these things. Like that is nonsense. But when something is an inaccurate claim that I assess when I'm not responding to it, I don't throw my hands up and say that's nonsense. I go, I don't think that's right. And then I go, well, here's why. And I can just explain it. Like if you listen to me when we have our Q&A episodes, and someone who is obviously my follower, they're in the iron culture inner circle, they've opted on, probably at 2 a.m. where they live, and they're asking me a question out of a sense of curiosity, you can see the educator Helms come out, the guy who loves teaching people. Like, oh yeah, no, that's a great question. Actually, that's not the way muscles operate. And here's the way it does work. And here's why. And here's some ways you can know it's true. But you catch me in the wild and you expose that to me, and it's an attack or a claim by someone like you, maybe who I already have a predisposition towards or a negative bias towards, and it's going to be throw my hands up, screw that guy and that idea and the horse they rode in on. And by the way, the world is a worse place with you in it. And I am going to now go to the gym and train very angrily today. But it's the same question. And that's why self-awareness is so important. And that's the last thing I have to say is look inward. Evaluate the way you're responding to something, because it can tell you a whole lot about the work you need to do. If you care about evidence-based fitness or practice, it's inherently about making people better and using all the best source of information available, either for yourself, it's okay if you're just an athlete, but if you want to be a better performer, then you need to get around these cognitive biases too. And in many ways, I'm glad that I'm still an athlete, Trex, not just a theorist or a science communicator who's trying to kind of win this rat race that we sometimes perceive it to be, because I truly don't care. If something is going to make me more jacked or big, Trex, I'll do it. And I think that ruthless, psychotic athlete, capitalistic bottom line is I'm going to get bigger or leaner or not. Sometimes it keeps me more honest because I'm a competitive person, which ironically I can engineer to help me be a more competitive person if I don't get too attached to some of these things.
No, it's a good point. I mean, it puts you in a position where now your vested interest is not in defending your claims of the past. It's in adapting to whatever seems to be the most defensible position moving forward. Because ultimately your focus is on application, not basically building a theory of everything in fitness that perfectly encapsulates all possible outcomes, right? So you don't need to try to retrofit reality to fit your theories. You're updating your theories to fit reality so you can simply go from third place to second place to first place.
Boom.
Yeah. The last thing,
from sixth place to fifth place.
I'm already
fifth place.
Shortcutting ahead because I know we're going sixth to fifth to fourth to third. So now we're trying to think moving up the podium.
I appreciate that faith.
So if I could, the last things I would wrap up with, again, I just want to be super clear that we're not doing this as some kind of holier than thou. You folks need to really look inward in terms of how, because you had the gall to critique an iron culture episode, but I think it's more so we're coming from a place of you and I have both, whether we want to or not, found ourselves ideologically embedded within tribes that form, right? So this tribalism stuff isn't, we're not above it. We're not beyond it. It's not like we've never kind of fallen into some of those traps. And we've been in those positions where we hear a conflicting idea and it feels like a threat rather than a competing narrative. We've been we've seen that, oh, so and so is being platformed on this major platform, and we say, of all the people that could come on to talk about that topic, you went with them instead of these 4 people that I like. Like, we've all been there, and we've had those same visceral reactions, and we've had to kind of sit with them and really look in the mirror and say, how come, like you said, Helms, when a person that I know is a listener asks this question, I immediately say, this is in good faith, and I have the first of all, I'm willing to entertain alternative perspectives, but I'm also in the educator mode. And then when this other random person on the internet is kind of calling me out, and I have no idea if they're, a supporter or not, now I'm in defensive mode and I am going to battle with them, right? It's the same question. For all you know, that random person could be someone who supports your work very much, right? But it's the context that creates a fundamentally different response deep down, well below the higher centers of your brain, where you feel attacked and defensive, or you feel like we're in a bad guys versus good guys situation here. So I think what we're saying is learn from our mistakes and kind of consider, when you start to feel some of those visceral reactions to what I always think about is, if I explain this to my aunt, if I explain this to my grandmother, how insane would I sound that I'm upset, right? So-and-so said that you can completely maximize muscle growth with 1.1 grams of protein per kilogram per day. And I hate this person, right? And your grandmother's saying, I don't understand what's happening. That is not the type of thing that a person would be upset about, right? So I think sometimes when you're feeling those kind of visceral reactions, it's always good to kind of take a deep breath and think through, like, first of all, what's going on here? Why am I feeling this way? And kind of getting a little more introspective. And that's not a, you guys should work on this. That's a, we all need to always work on this, because inevitably we get more married to ideas than we should. We get more married to our little tribal groups than we should. We get more married to lines in the sand than we should. And if we just stop fighting it, even though it's a natural urge, then we will end up in this place where our version of engaging with the science is more just following the soap opera. And ultimately, it's not going to lead us toward actually getting better. It's going to lead toward, again, a lot of cynicism, a lot of propping up people that we're not cynical about and probably giving them more credit than they should be getting. We're probably putting them on a pedestal that they've not really earned or don't really deserve. And it ultimately just introduces these major sources of bias that distort our thinking and make us worse at engaging with the evidence, which is the whole reason why we're in this stuff, right? So conclusions, I'd say, make sure that you really are always vigilant about that distinction between skepticism and cynicism, skepticism versus vitriol to people that are not in your in-group. Try to make charitable assumptions about intent until proven otherwise, and also be open to the idea that a person who maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago operated a certain way, be open to if we are not open to the idea that people can get better in their content, get better with their intentions, get better across various domains, that's not a world I want to live in, Helms. Like,
if you're not open to the idea that people can change, you don't belong in health or fitness, right?
Yeah, well, yeah. That is kind of the whole point.
This is the wrong field for you.
Yeah.
What predicts, change, self-efficacy, self-belief? Right. Well, I don't believe people can change. Okay, thank you. Maybe just get into engineering, Yeah.
Stray for the engineers in the group. No.
Sorry.
But so yeah, try to make charitable assumptions. And part of that is being open to the idea that someone you disagreed with 15 years ago maybe has come closer to your way of seeing the world. Maybe they've drifted further away, but you won't know unless you engage with an open mind. And then finally, the last point I'll leave people with is I'm very much of the belief that you learn more from the conversations that you have with people with different perspectives, more so than conversations with people who have your same shared perspective. And so, of course, I totally understand there will be people in this world, Helms. I don't want to fall prey to that fallacy you mentioned where we just assume it's a just world and everybody has the best possible intentions and there are no bad actors. That's not a perspective that is really in your best interest as you navigate the world more broadly. But nonetheless, I think that we should be slow to kind of categorize people as irredeemable. Fundamentally, they cannot come back from this. I think the more that we view people as broadly being good actors until proven otherwise, ultimately, what I was getting at though is there are going to be some of those like legitimately bad actors out there. And if you decide, I simply don't want to engage with this person because I've seen time and time again in years ago and recently and everywhere in between, this person is malicious in nature. I totally get that you would say, I'm just not interested, right? There is a way that you can abuse someone's trust to the point that you can't really regain it easily. So I totally understand that. I'm not saying you should navigate the world naively and have absolutely no eyes open with regards to, who has good intentions and who doesn't. But I think that we should have relatively, we should be relatively cautious about how quickly we banish people into that irredeemable category, especially when it's a difference over, I think your warm up is too long.
Yeah, 100%. And call me crazy, but maybe in the evidence-based space, we should have sufficient evidence before we call someone a bad actor.
That's a good point. All right, Helms. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up here?
No, I just want to, you mentioned you're raised Catholic earlier. I just want to confess, just to be clear, if you've talked to me at a conference, especially if you catch me afterwards or you bring up something that really bothered me, or hell, Trex knows this, you can catch Helms 100% on a gossip-filled rant, frustrated about some things that people said who he wishes were gate kept out of the evidence-based space.
And society.
Get that off my chest.
Gate kept out of society. Yeah. Banished to a faraway island. Yeah.
I don't like them. They shouldn't be here. And then about 20 minutes later, you hear me backpedaling and judging myself and feeling bad. And then you also will hear that when I actually make content or get on a podcast or post about it, that I try to be a better version of myself. But 100%, I do this. It is my knee jerk, which is why it takes the redirect of the little child, Helms, of the better version of myself. And when I post, you see it being slightly different. It doesn't mean I'm two-faced. It means I'm a flawed man trying to be better. But I think, I am not above it, ever. And anyone who knows me even decently well absolutely knows that's not the case. You can catch me talking mad shit, and it's more of a reflection of just me being triggered.
Yeah.
And just don't lead with that. Don't let that be who you are.
Yeah. And I want to defend myself a little bit in the sense, a lot of people think I'm too harsh on you on the show, but in reality, you hired me for that very reason. You basically said, I need someone to call me out for all of my shortcomings and all of my flaws as a human being. And so all I'm doing is what I'm contractually obligated to do when I constantly call you out and highlight many of your shortcomings and issues.
The only thing that stops me from becoming a true clinical narcissist rather than just having strong narcissistic traits is the fact that you regularly call me a true clinical narcissist. So I think people just need to realize that you serve a very important function.
Yeah.
I am teetering on the edge of joining the dark side, folks, and I need to be held in check.
Yeah, to borrow on an analogy with regards to maintaining vegetation, people think I'm chopping you down, but I'm just pruning. I just come in and do the little selective, little tiny cuts just to make sure that you don't become completely overgrown and ultimately diseased.
Thank you. I appreciate you keeping me healthy.
Yeah. All right, folks. Thank you so much for joining us, as always, on Iron Culture. Always love to hear your feedback on the show. Looking forward to it. Thanks so much for being part of the culture of the Iron. We once again ask if you find it in your heart to support our dear friends at Elite FTS using the code MRR10, Mass Research Review 10 for a 10% discount. And of course, if you want to see what's going on in fitness and in science on January 1st with that new issue of Mass, head over to massresearchreview.com and consider becoming a part of the Mass community as well. We will be back in 7 days with a pre-recorded episode. We're going to enjoy a little bit of holiday time here. And if you happen to be celebrating holidays this time of the year, we hope that you very thoroughly enjoy them. And we hope you really enjoy the episode coming out in 7 days. Everybody, happy holidays and take care.